issues. I want to explain to you, I know you've seen, I want to introduce Ed McBrayer. He's the Executive Director of the Path Foundation. He's basically in the trails business, and they built the Silver Common and a lot of trails all over the place. And I want to explain why they're involved in this process. They're here because we asked them to be. They didn't ask to insert themselves into our lives, but Ed has been a part of the Friends of Carrollton Greenbelt. I'm privileged to be on that committee, and a lot of you are. It's been one of the most effective groups of people that I have had the privilege to work with, and so we really thought that group would be very effective in looking at our downtown and helping us decide what would make it better and make it safer and more pedestrian friendly. Ed brought a team in called the Tool Group, and he's going to introduce those. At that point, I'll shut up. So Ed, you'll take it away. Thank you.
I just want to very quickly talk about the Path Foundation. We're a nonprofit 501c3, so we're here. We're free. We're the only free part of this equation, I think. But I wanted to. I'm basically an aerospace engineer that likes to ride a bicycle, and I formed the Path Foundation in Atlanta because there was no place to ride a bicycle. And since then, we built about 210 miles of trails throughout Georgia and South Carolina and down over in Mississippi. But Kent and Johnston and Laura asked us to come out and help with the Greenbelt, and I've been very privileged to be implementing the Greenbelt plan for 3 or 4 years now. We were asked to look at the downtown area because we're already talking about ways to connect the Greenbelt into downtown. So obviously this is going to be the hub of the system, and the Greenbelt sort of ends up being the wheel, if you will, and we're going to try to put some spokes out to the wheel. So we're trying to make Carrollton a really cool place for bicycles and pedestrians to be to get along with the cars. I'd like to introduce my group, planning and design group. Greta DeMayo here is with Kaizen Collaborative. She's been designing all the sections of the Greenbelt so far that you've been enjoying. Carlos Perez back here is puts our visions on paper. He's a really good Georgia Tech graduate, recent Georgia Tech graduate in city planning and everything, and he's been working hard on this as well. We got Ian Lockwood and Ken Ray back here from the Tool Design Group. They're sort of the experts around the country, in my opinion, the best experts for helping small towns and even urban areas redefine themselves to be more bike and pedestrian friendly, and maybe slow the cars down a little bit and make cars behave when there's bikes and pedestrians around. So we've been thinking that's what you guys needed, and we think part of the thing we're trying to do here is make your town square a destination rather than an intersection, and make it a place where cars visit people rather than people visiting a bunch of cars going by, and make it more about from a human scale rather than from an automobile scale. So with that, I'll turn it over. You're gonna, oh yeah, Greta, why don't you come up and tell them what we're doing here and introduce the rest of the team.
I'll set the stage. Like Ed said, I'm Greta DeMayo. I'm with Kaizen Collaborative, leading the design team here, and we're just excited to be presenting to everyone today and see a lot of familiar faces that we saw on Wednesday, and we appreciate everybody's input over the process of the charrette, over the process of the 4 days. And just to set the stage, we'll be in here, depending on how long-winded these guys get, about an hour. And so we're going to start with really a little bit of educational type information. So we're casting some vision here, so we're going to have great imagery to show everyone. And with that, I'll just let Ian kind of get us started.
Well, hello everybody.
Hey.
Good morning. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you all for coming during the week. We showed up on Tuesday, and a number of you came in and shared with us, what you thought about the square and the issues and the opportunities and that sort of thing. And what we tried to do was translate what you told us into some drawings. And So these drawings, by the way, the ink was drying as you were pulling up to the parking lot. So this will be the first time that we have seen the presentation while we're showing it to you. So it's brand new, and we're looking forward to sharing it with you. Like Greta said, first of all, thanks Greta for leading the team this week. It was great. And also thanks for the Path Foundation and the city for hosting this. So we're going to share with you some ideas. We're going to start with some principles and ideas at the beginning to give us the vocabulary to discuss the actual square idea, because it didn't come out of a vacuum, so we want to give you the background. Now there's 7 or 8 people standing up. There's 7 or 8 chairs over here if you want to sit down, because your legs will probably get tired in about an hour, I'm sure. So let's see what we have first. Oh yes, the background. So Adamson was a lawyer and judge and congressman. Interestingly, he enacted the 8-hour workday for railway workers, which became the standard for everybody. That was one of his moves, was the Adamson Act. And he was also famous for water power in the South, which ran a lot of the mills and stuff for the cotton industry. And then the square itself was surveyed and laid out about 1830, and then it was paved, well later, and then renovated more recently. And of course, it's home to all sorts of things right now, festivals and shops and so forth. So this week we met with folks, we looked at maps, we chatted, we marked things up, we got all kinds of ideas. We learned all about your context. And then we went on out for a walk, and we looked at all of your streets, and we drove around the city. We saw, you'll help me with the names, I think it was Maple. And we looked at some of the queuing and some of the sources of those issues. One of the things that we're going to emphasize is that we think that the success of the square isn't all just about the design of the square. There's broader ideas that will help the square, like not routing every trip through the square that has no business coming through the square. There's other options, and they don't need to come here clogging up the whole square for everybody else. So there's some ideas like that. And we notice how small some of your streets are, quite narrow, very. This is a situation where, you've got lots of signals out there. We heard about how confusing they are, and then we tried to understand them ourselves. And you've got, 8 ways to cross the street, and a variety of signals. And here's a fellow going, there's the walk signal for the walkers, but he's going the other way, so there's actually no red light for him when you're leaving the square. He came out of the parking lot. So actually he's going through the crosswalk when the pedestrians have the green light. So there's some operational problems with that, and a lot of people found it confusing with the 8 driveways servicing the 56 parking spaces. And then we looked at, this is the amphitheater area, and so you've got this wonderful public amenity right here, and the square right there, and they don't really connect well, so we have some ideas on how to make the spaces work together, we'll share with you. And then just sort of the whole automobile focus of it. There's a lot of traffic coming through here, and the signals and the turn lanes and everything are all about processing the traffic. And I think the sentiment was with the community was folks wanted to be more of a place, more for people, not so much a place for cars. And then we looked at some of the issues for things like handicapped folks and barrier-free design. And I guess they're technically compliant, but there's some issues, like poles in the middle of the path, and how do you find these locations? And these are some of the old images going way back. The square has always been a source of exchange, place for people to go and trade and meet and socialize. It used to have I guess that was a water tower and a well in the middle, way back when. And so this has always been the center of the community. And then cars came along, and the square started getting more formalized. The big statues put up, which down by the courthouse, I think, right now. And then this sort of island in the middle has had several different shapes. There's a square shape, and then they cut the corners off with the little walls and things. There it is again. You can see the cars circulating around the square. And then somebody did a really nice panorama, and it's etched in the sidewalk in the square right now. And this is sort of, if you could look every direction at once, this is what you would see. Again, huge exchange, and this is what it looks like now. And so what we're trying to do is bring back that sense of social and economic exchange. We heard a lot about what people liked. The trees, the historic buildings, the compactness of the downtown, nice scale, the convenient parking, good emergency service access, all the special events, kind of the small town feel. And then there's a lot of pride in the community about what we call foundational attributes. You know, good corporate structure in the city in terms of jobs and participation. You know, intellectually well grounded with the schools, the university, and this one, which is probably the most important today, is the sort of aspirational quality of the community of wanting to continue to improve it so you can keep attracting investment and people, which attracts employers and jobs and sort of thing. So I think everybody has this idea of continually building on your past and making the city better. Things that people didn't like was the confusing traffic control, all the conflicts with the driveways, speeding. There was a lot of places like the courthouse and other places where people in cars go too quickly. The sort of accessibility issues for handicapped people, all the congestion. Folks wanted it to be a more inviting place. There was a lot of issues with grades, not just the hills coming up, but the grade of the square itself. If you notice, when you're standing on one side of the square, the whole thing kind of rises up and goes to the other side, which kind of diminishes the way the buildings relate to the square. So there's some thoughts about regrading the square to make it look better. Deliveries, there was a big concern. The cut-through traffic, and the people think that the place or the territory or the feeling of ownership could be increased in the square. And then there was a lot of ideas of what to create, which was pretty exciting. More safety, access to and from the Greenway. And by the way, this is a really cool thing you guys are doing. Not a lot of cities have this sort of big idea, and building it is, you'll see in a moment some slides showing how popular it is, but connecting it to the downtown is a really great idea. Making it friendly for children and elderly people. Art, there's a big idea of bringing more arts into the square. Being outdoor, because you have such great weather, maybe not today, it might be a little chilly, but a lot of the times the weather's fantastic, creating a great meeting place. This idea of branding and creating identity came up over and over again. Making the city known for its great square even more than it is today. Attracting investment, being friendly to retailing and restaurants and that kind of thing. We heard this over and over again. How do you make the place more walkable? How do you make it walkable from the garages, and how do you make it walkable within itself and to the neighborhoods? The connection to the university was a big idea. You have 11 or 12,000 people up there, and you've got the town down here, and you've got a bit of a gauntlet in between. How do you make that a nice way to get back and forth? We heard that a lot. And then bicycle parking. So once you get here with your bike, what do you do with it? So let's back up a little bit, because we get so focused on what we're doing right away, we sometimes lose focus on the really big picture. And the really big picture is, why do we even have cities? Like, why do cities even exist? And the purpose of cities is to advance social and economic exchange, is to bring people together to trade, to socialize, to get educated, for entertainment, labor. Everything comes together in cities. They're an efficiency thing. So the transportation purpose of cities is to minimize long distance travel, so bring people together for efficient exchange. And then the land use purpose is to concentrate the components of civic life. And you're already doing a pretty good job with that. You've got a really good mix of uses in the downtown. You're just getting a big hotel getting built right next to this building. So concentrating all these sorts of things in the downtown. So you have lots and lots of little trips, little short trips, which translates into walking trips, which translates into vibrancy. And I think that's what people were were talking about when we were meeting with them. They wanted a vibrant downtown. Do you remember in your history lessons when people thought the Earth was the center of the solar system and all the planets and the sun revolved around the Earth, and how complicated the models were? You know, there's always problems trying to predict the orbits of the planets. And then somebody came along and said, hey, you know, maybe the sun's in the middle. And then suddenly everything started working out. You could predict the orbits really easily. Well, when we have the car in the center of our solar system, of our city planning, it gets complicated and difficult. But I think we've heard a lot that we want to put people back in the center of the solar system, and when we put the pedestrian and people in the center of the solar system for the square, things start to make sense, they kind of start to become easier. Now the car is important still, but it's not the essence of the place. It's really about the people, and I think we heard that over and over. Does anybody recognize this? What this animal is?
A horse.
It's a horse. Very good. Has anybody actually seen a horse skeleton before? Yeah, it's a horse. Anybody recognize that? That's also a mammal. That's a clue. Anybody know what that is? No, these legs belong to the horse, by the way. It's a manatee. And you notice that they're both mammals. They both have lungs and kidneys. They both are warm-blooded. They both eat grass. So they have a lot of similarities. But this one runs around on the ground, and this one swims around in warm water. And it's because of their skeleton. And cities have skeletons. We call it the bone structure of the city. So if you take an X-ray of the city, of the streets, same ingredients: houses, offices, parks, and so forth, but completely different outcomes depending on the bones or the street network. Anybody recognize where this is? Savannah, very good. So lots of streets, very walkable, great access to public spaces. If there's a collision here, nobody minds because there's all sorts of different ways of getting around. In this city, if there's a collision here, what happens? Yeah.
Back up in every direction.
The whole thing shuts down, right? It's very vulnerable. And you don't know where you are. You know, if you want to go north, you have to go south and east and south, and it's very circuitous. Here you know where you are. It's legible, multiple routing options. So completely different outcomes because of the bone structure. Anybody know where that is, by the way? It doesn't matter, does it? But you know by its X-ray that it's a horrible place and you'd never want to go there, right? It's actually Irvine, California, so that kind of confirms what we're talking about. So what about cities are about networks, so we're kind of looking for this, and crossing two-lane streets, even a lot of them, is a lot easier than crossing big streets. It's kind of like climbing stairs. You know, lots of little stairs are easier than climbing, you know, big stairs. And so it's no coincidence that the most walkable cities in the United States have lots of streets, like Savannah, you know, like Old Town Alexandria, like Charleston. You know, remember if you ever go to those cities, lots of little streets. And you have lots of little streets, but they're getting bigger because of pressure on, you know, traffic pressure on them. So with a fine block structure, it helps inform the land use patterns. You know, with big blocks, you get big development, and then of course it concentrates all the traffic on the big street. This gives you lots of routing options, which allows each street to stay in scale, and so that human village kind of small town scale was important to a lot of people. So this is so we're going to show you a group of groupings of slides, which will all culminate together at the end into a concept. So the first sets of ideas are about shared space and barrier-free design. So this is a mansion, and in this house, there's a room for everything. There's a kitchen, an eating kitchen, there's a dining room, there's a breakfast room, there's a pantry, there's a study. Now the kids actually study in the kitchen, but anyway, there's a room, and everything, all the activities are supposed to be separated by both space and time. This is an efficiency apartment, and now all the same activities that happen in the mansion happen in the efficiency apartment, but they're only separated in terms of time. So the space is shared, it's much more efficient. In street planning, there's often this idea that we want to accommodate everybody, so there's a space for walking, space for trees, space for parking, space for bike lanes, space for cars, and some streets there's transit spaces. But in your city, the street spaces are pretty narrow. You don't have huge rights of way, so something has to share. So just like the efficiency apartment shares, what happens when you don't have giant rights of way? You know, either you don't accommodate somebody, or you have to partially share the street, or you fully share the street. And so I think we heard a lot about, we wanted to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists. So we're into this kind of territory. And so the magic in this is, how do we share? How do we allocate the scarce resources of space so that we can have multiple functions? So this goes back a few hundred years. This is in Italy, and this is called a shared space. And notice they have walking, and you can ride your bike, you can park, you can do anything on that street. There's no pavement markings, but it's been working successfully for a couple of hundred years. Here's a bigger one. Again, a shared space. Lots of different functions happening here. There's another one. This is a little, it's like a little bit of a roundabout, but you can walk around it. And this lady here is actually quite comfortable in walking through it because it's all operating at a slow speed. When you share, cars have to go slower because when they go fast, they're not very good at sharing anymore. So you've got to get them to go slow. So there's a shared space. Now this one, I showed those ones because they're all little. They're all tight little streets. Now this one's a bit bigger. And they could have and used to have, oh, you have to go?
No.
Okay. They used to have sidewalks and tree lawns and parking and all the different lanes. But they took that out and they put in this more of a plaza space. And so there's some business people eating lunch, some tourists, some locals on their bikes, there's a restaurant area. And it still has all the same functions, but it's shared. Here's another one. This is just used to be a big series of intersections. They made this plaza out of it. This is in one of the Scandinavian countries, and of course they have terrible winters, so they like these sort of open type plazas. And you know, it's very friendly for people with mobility impairment. Here's another shared space. This is a kind of a Main Street environment. So the motorists generally stay here, and these are called comfort zones where pedestrians go. But it gives the pedestrians freedoms to go all around. And the benefit is mainly from a safety perspective because the drivers are going slower and they're paying attention, unlike when they're just looking at signals and ignoring their environment. So safety gets better, and if you close the street for an event, you've got this great, fantastic plaza. They also have deliveries, so they make spaces for trucks so they can deliver goods and services. And there's a whole bunch of different folks with different mobility impairments getting around quite successfully in this more inclusive type space. This used to be a conventional intersection. It was replaced with this more of a plaza look. Has a little bit of art. You can see the seating on the sides. Notice there's no bollards. They haven't tried to wall off the whole thing. That's a 90s idea. Apparently drivers know not to drive over there. We used to treat drivers like complete idiots, but they're actually not, and they know where they're supposed to go. So this operates really safely, and it's a really nice space. This is a much larger intersection. These tall things here are just to light up the intersection at night. There's no pavement markings, there's no crosswalks, there's no signals. Here's some art, there's some seating. This is what it used to be like. It was highly engineered. Somebody in some DOT headquarters figured out where you walk, how fast you go, when you can go, when it's green, how big your lanes are, all that kind of thing, who goes first. And they replaced it with this plaza because this wasn't working. It was, the businesses weren't doing all that great, and there was crashes. And it's a major bus route, and this is what it looks like on the ground. So people come in, whether on foot or by car, they all know what to do. And don't ever say that they don't want to drive fast in Europe because they invent these really fast cars. So that guy wants to go fast, but the environment sort of says, hey, you want to go a little slower here. This is Exhibition Row in London, England. This was a conventionally designed street, and they replaced it with this. Much more successful in terms of retailing, safety. All the museums are along here. It's a really busy tourist area. That's what it looks like. Huge successful project. This is a couple. I'll just show you a few of our projects. This one is a downtown street in West Palm Beach, and it was a real challenge city, and we took, so that house, is that house? So we took out the curbs and we made this flush street, and so it's much more inclusive now. People are much more comfortable using the street. We put oak trees between every parking space. This was right after construction, but now you're getting this kind of outdoor room where it's very comfortable to walk, and you can do farmers markets, and people in wheelchairs don't have to go to the end of the block to cross the street. This is down in Jacksonville. Same kind of the idea, we replace the conventional street with this, and it's attracting all sorts of investment. This is up in Canada. This is kind of more of a snowy type area. It's downtown Mississauga, just next to Toronto. There's the city hall, so it's literally right downtown, and this is a university. And this is the first roundabout in that city. The city's about 1 million people, just to give you the scale. So we built this university, we did the campus plan, we built, this is the first building in the street. And that is the 3rd busiest mall in all of Canada. And this is called Square One Mall, and this is Square One Drive, which leads to the mall, right through the university. Looking out this window, if you look down at the street, this is what it looks like. So this, all this parking lot and stuff will be new phases of the university, and the students cross here to get to their other classes. And this is the street. And because of the design, you don't need all kinds of heroic signals and so forth. People can cross very comfortably. This is University of Central Florida. They have a student population of about 50,000 students. That's their football stadium. And so I took this picture and I just turned the camera, and this is what the street looks like. And this is their main kind of shopping street. They have like a main street in the university, the bookstore, and so forth. If you go down the street, behind the store is the student residences. But notice there's no curbs. So you got a lot of student drivers, you got a lot of people going to football games, you have all this activity to the main street, no curbs. Safety has gone way up, and this guy can participate equitably in the street. So it's very inclusive place for all the students and all the visitors. This is the basketball arena in Orlando. Tens of thousands of seats in here, so they have big events and big concerts and so on. So when we redid the street here, this is where all the front doors are into the venue. We don't have any curbs, and so it operates just like a normal street during the day, and then at night it can become a plaza. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to stay a street, and you have all kinds of events, food trucks, parties, July 4th, whatever you want can happen out there. And at night you can have concerts and all, wine tasting and all kinds of things. I know you have all sorts of events in your square, so this sort of flush space might be a really good idea for that. We're going to talk a little bit about roundabouts. There's a bunch of round things you'll find in streets, traffic circles, roundabouts, and mini circles. And we're going to be talking more about this kind of scale of idea. That's a traffic circle. We're not recommending that because they're really dangerous. This is more like a roundabout with a splitter island, and that's a mini circle up there. So those are the kind of 3 round things you'll find in streets. And this is why signals are so dangerous, because there's so many ways to hit one another. We call them conflict points. And this is a roundabout. There are far fewer ways to hit folks, so that's why there's about 50% fewer crashes at roundabouts compared to signals. There's probably 90% fewer deaths and injuries, so much safer than traffic signals. These are the parts of the roundabout. And you can cross them easily on foot. What you do is you look one way, cross halfway, look the other way, and you're across. So it's really easy to cross. We're using them by schools now. We're building several at Central Michigan University, helping kids cross the street. And you can ride through them. We designed it to be slow so you can ride your bike easily through them. So here's 2 old ladies, for example, riding their bikes. Both of them got killed by a car just as they went around the corner. No, they didn't. Actually, they went through quite safely and comfortably. Here's a bus going through. Here's a tractor trailer going through. We use them a lot in revitalization projects. Here's a beach area which was falling on hard times because of the barrier effect of the street. The cars are just going so fast. And we put in the roundabout, and the whole place has been redeveloping since. This is in the Miami area. The signal wouldn't work here because there wasn't room for the turn lanes. And by putting in the roundabout, we got rid of the turn lanes, which meant we could build the building. Now you've got turn lanes using up a ton of your space in your downtown, all those left turn lanes, which you could reclaim a lot of space for better purposes. This is the largest roundabout in the country. It's in Clearwater. That's the before picture. That's the after. Took out about 5 sets of signals, made the area much more walkable and more beautiful. So that's what it looks like from the ground. It's the largest one in the country now. And that's what it looks like kind of from an oblique. We're not proposing anything nearly that big. Here's a 5-lane arterial street in San Diego. And it was a barrier. Nobody let their kids walk through here because it was so hostile. And what happened here is we put in a series of roundabouts. And because roundabouts are so much more efficient than traffic signals, we could narrow the 5 lanes to 2. And so now it's a 2-lane street, and the extra space was turned over to wider sidewalks and parking and all sorts of things that the community wanted on their street. This is where the biggest art gallery is in South Florida. This is a campus, and that's the college dorms. And this is a high-speed arterial running through a state road, running through both of them. And that intersection got replaced with this sort of, it's kind of a roundabout, but there's no splitter islands. And this is getting closer to what we're thinking might be appropriate here. This is another huge intersection. And notice how the traffic engineer has dictated all the movements when and how. And of course there were crashes at this intersection. And they decided they were going to do this sort of pseudo roundabout like I just showed you. And it looks like that. And so now people can ride and bike and everything through there. These are called road diets. Something that we're recommending as part of the set of solutions. This is Dixie Highway, and it was all about just moving cars fast, through this downtown. And the idea was to reclaim some of the space and invest it in for pedestrians and businesses. Notice the weeds growing out of the broken windows of the empty building. Once we fixed up the street, businesses have moved in, and this place is far more successful. Oh, by the way, this is also a raised intersection, where you'll be seeing some of those in a moment, where pedestrians cross at the level. They don't have to negotiate ramps. So if you're pushing a stroller or something, you can get across the street much more easily. This is a 4-lane commuter route, which we narrowed to 2 lanes with lateral shifts, and then this part of the street we recycled into a linear park to connect the whole park system. Something like you're talking about connecting your greenbelt. This is a 5-lane state arterial, which we narrowed to 2 lanes with wide sidewalks and street trees, slowing the community back together. Again, raised intersections. There's 2 elementary schools on the street, so now the kids can cross the street easily. And then here's a raised crosswalk. So instead of the whole intersection getting raised, it's just the crosswalk part. And so that helped sew this university campus back together again. So the most popular road diet in the United States is this 4-lane to 3-lane conversion. And Ken's going to show you where we're suggesting one of those. And you can use the reclaimed space for something else. And we're, of course, thinking of a connection to your trail system. This is why it works so well. You get rid of all the weaving when you have a 4-lane section. With a 3-lane section, you can't weave because the center lane is for turning, so which really helps businesses. When 2 cars are trying to turn across one another, you probably felt this. What's the name of that street? Pardon me?
Bankhead Highway?
Lincoln Highway?
Bankhead Highway?
Yeah, that's the one. So, you can't see past the car where there's someone else coming up, and especially if you're crossing on foot or something. So the sight distances are far better when you have the center turn lane. And then, have you ever gone in a situation where somebody in front of you is turning left, and then you come up behind them, but your indicator's not on? So the guy behind you doesn't know why you're stopping. So you have rear end crashes, so it avoids those. And then speeding. Whenever you get 2 lanes going in the same direction, you find there's a lot of speeding. It's easier to park on a 3-lane street than a 4-lane street, because you avoid the weaving. And then getting out and in of driveways. You have to find a gap in both directions to pull out. Here you can do it in 2 motions, or get out of the way of the traffic when you're going in. So again, very good for businesses. And then for cycling, of course, it's much better because you have a little bit of space for the cyclists. And you're already doing this in some places. You do these sort of mid-block refuges, which really help pedestrians cross the street. And here's just an example of one that was done in paint. So this was a budget project. It's at Edgewater Drive in Orlando again. And this was a really dilapidated street with a lot of speeding, a big commuter route. And it went to 3 lanes. And suddenly, stores started opening, and you know, it had a resurgence in its economy. Now they have all kinds of festivals and stuff. And this one got analyzed to death because it was one of the first ones. And so crashes went down, injuries went down. This one about. Oh yeah, speeding went down. And this is just a sample from elsewhere. And in every case, the collisions go down, so they're very safe. And then we put together a group of examples and, you know, the traffic volumes, and you're well within the range of success for the volumes that you have in your streets. So this is kind of getting to the square itself now, the kind of outdoor room idea. These 2 streets are both 30 feet wide, curb to curb, and they both have mature trees, but these trees, you know, really make a difference, don't they? So they create this kind of outdoor room, so a much more comfortable street, creates a sense of enclosure, helps drivers go more slowly, and it makes it more comfortable to walk, particularly in hot climates like here. Here's another, you know, you get this wonderful sense of enclosure, very comfortable street to walk. So this is a bridge project that we worked on, and we were trying to make this bridge head nice, and we brought in full-size oak trees. We barged them in and transplanted them, and we had instant ambiance because we had a sense of enclosure on the bridge. So people sit here and watch the fireworks over the water, and this is a pad for art and kind of thing. The trees made a big difference. It's in Barcelona, and you know, if you ever want to not understand a street, take a picture of a good street from the air, and all you'll see is green, because you know, underneath is where the action is, right? So underneath is the cool place where all the people are doing all their things. And the trees form this sort of outdoor room's roof and gives that beautiful sense of enclosure and comfort in a very hot climate as well. Just a little bit about Main Streets. This isn't West Palm, this is the West Palm story. So the city was it kind of fell apart, and Crack America was filmed in this downtown. That's how bad it was. The city had $7,000 in reserves when it hit rock bottom. Prostitution and drug dealing were huge. The folks made the streets really great for escaping. So a lot of one-way streets, wide streets, levels of service were the most important thing. So people left and then they became car dependent and drove back in. So there's only 80,000 people living in the city, but it had 30%, it was the county seat, so it had 30% of the jobs in the county, and so there's this big tidal flow back and forth. And so then the city, to make room for all those cars, they tore down half their buildings and put in surface parking lots. That's the main street. Before it was a one-way street, and it got two-way and beautified. Facade grants were given to building owners, and you see this. You see some of the streets here, where an old fancy, beautiful brick facade got covered over to be more modern. Have you seen some around here? I should have brought in a picture. Anyway, some of these buildings get what we call facadamized. They get this modern application put on top of them. And so we perform what we call a facadamectomy and restore the historic facade. So that facade turned into that facade, and that was an empty building before, and now it's filled, and there's restaurants on the lower floor, and where there was prostitutes hanging out on the corner, now they can enjoy a real nice lunch here at the new restaurant. So that was at the end of the street. That's the old library, and it was all about the car. And what we did is we took out the signals and we took out the turn lanes, and we raised the crossing to sidewalk height. And now, so families started coming down and picnicking and stuff during the day. And we built this fountain for the kids, and the kids came because it's hot in West Palm Beach, and they brought their parents, and their parents wanted to eat and stuff, so the restaurants started to thrive. And the drug dealers and the prostitutes just didn't want to be around anymore, and they left. And this is where Crack America actually filmed. All the houses were torn down for all sorts of different reasons. This building was saved. Now, if you look at that building, that's the only thing you'll recognize in the next picture. This is the before picture, and that's the after picture. So my job was to get the streets right, but that building is this building. And then working with the private developers in the private sector, we got restaurants and a theater over here. You see the housing. So it became a mixed-use place, much more successful place than it was before. You can see the art and so on. This was an old church. It was probably one of the only buildings that didn't either fall down or got torn down, and we thought, okay, we're going to save that. And this is where we wanted to put in a beautiful plaza. And so there's the after picture. There's the before. That's the after. So we made it into like a performing arts place, and then a real place where people can congregate and meet. This is in Sulphur Springs, Texas. This is about the same size as your city. That's their old courthouse square, and used to be a place of exchange, and then it turned into this kind of vacated place. All the businesses, by the way, moved out of here to the highway bypass in a sort of a suburban format. It left this place as a hollow place. The only real things left behind were the banks, and they were just about to move before we got involved. That's what it looked like from the aerial. There's a one-way state truck route this way, and another one that way. And that's, if you look at Google Earth today, you'll see our new square. And so we took the parking lot out, and we two-wayed all the streets and made them flush, so there's no curbs here. And and this is all finished now. I took the picture under construction. All the intersections are raised now. And so now they can have big events in this fantastic plaza. The streets allow people to spill over, and if you're pushing a carriage, you don't have to worry about them going to the end of the block. So people can come here and just have a picnic by themselves. This is the splash fountain for the kids. They have the farmer's market there now. It's just every Saturday. Great place for social exchange. Culturally, what was really important here was the vets community, so this is the new Vets Memorial. They have all kinds of entertainment coming in at different scales. They put on dances for the kids, and in the wintertime it gets pretty cold, so they do this kind of luge run, little toboggan run for the kids. The drama people put on historic performances, reenact historic events. This is the old Vets Memorial, and notice, you can't disrespectful, putting something like this in the middle of your parking lot. But anyway, during the construction, we took him away, and we brought him back, and now it's in a place of honor in the community. These squares can be really spectacular places for mementos like this, and then the vets have a place to go and remember their friends and everything. Now, when you ever do a splash pad, you have to have a bathroom, right? In this place, we needed two. Can anybody see where the bathroom is?
It's that silhouette mirrored.
Yeah, it's made out of mirrors. So we wanted to make it fit into the square. Interestingly, this fits in exactly because it's a mirror image of everything around it, right? But it's just, and then this is part of that, we did a little chest theme, which is pretty popular. And so there's the chest. Now here's a girl trying to look into the bathroom. And there's Ken at the back of the room. He's taking her picture. And he can see out perfectly. He just can't see in. So this has become a tourist attraction. Interestingly, every major news group found out about our project and came and did interviews with the city manager. And it made, the Learning Channel did a documentary on the world's wackiest bathrooms, and ours was the first episode. It was very cool. But we just did this because we thought it was cool. We were hoping to get press about two-waying the streets and making them flush and two-way, but brick streets to get the texture to slow down the cars. No, they focused on the bathrooms. So there's the heater for the wintertime. It gets cold here. In the summer, it's an air conditioner. And by the way, whenever you do this, make sure at nighttime it reverses, right? So you can see in the bathroom, but you can't see out. So you have to light it from the outside. So here are the lights. So at nighttime, it still works, okay? So you're okay. And so this square attracted a ton of investment. So here's a new candy shop that opened up. This old drugstore had been empty for a couple of decades. And so now there's a nice steak restaurant down here and 3 new condominiums up top. And the banks have expanded. That's one of the banks at the back. There's a nice flush street. But there's a beautiful street, and it's really helped bring the community together. So here's some programming idea, and I'm gonna pass this on to Greta because she does really well at this sort of thing. This will be a team effort.
This was the part in the presentation that I really was excited about. We're gonna start honing in on Adamson Square. Of course, you know that Adamson Square has great opportunities for all kinds of programming for people to come and gather and have community. In the mornings, it could be programming for more, outside the coffee shop, just sitting, kind of gathering, getting your day started, having some meetings. We also have programming that can be more interactive with people coming together and having activities. We have a picture at the top of kind of a reading area. I think one of the unique things about Adamson Square is the bookstore. And so trying to figure out what kind of areas would be within Adamson Square. Here's some more examples. Interactive examples with kids coming together, people of all ages coming together. I think Ken had said the other day from 8 to 80. Let's get everybody as a community coming together to the square, just wanting to be there, wanting to enjoy it, having all kinds of activities. There's lots of popular functions that can be incorporated. There are a couple of different things too. Festivals, obviously you already have your events that you have in the square. You embrace the square during those events. Everybody loves just kind of taking over. And then there's different things out there too that are even interactive. Encourage people to have activity, to move around. This was one of the products that kind of generates energy. It takes your energy as you step on it, and you can use it in different ways to light things. So there's a picture of it. It's called Pave Gen. And here's some other interactive elements that are being used in outdoor spaces. And these are swings that are musical and light up at the same time. And you can imagine how many people come to a space that has a swing like this and wait to be able to use it because it's always being used. And of course, just the community coming out, having a space that is multifunction, that it could be someone playing a musical instrument, somebody wanting to dance, just being able to gather together as community. And so those are some of the programming options that we just kind of wanted to set the stage.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, the possibilities are endless. One of the things that we thought were really important is that the businesses in the buildings can express themselves outdoors and get a little more space out there. So just stepping back regionally, there's a tendency to want to solve the square's issues just at the square. But we think the source of some of the problems challenging the square occur far away. And so here's the route into town to the square and out again. And somebody spent a lot of money building this really big bypass. And there's signals at each end. And when you're driving up to a signal and it's green, there's a tendency to want to go straight. And so consequently, because of signal timing and this sort of bias of the signal to make folks go straight, a lot of people do, even though a portion of them really don't want to do anything in downtown. They're not going shopping, they're not doing something, but they're not using the bypass. So we were thinking that if we did, instead of the signals, we did roundabouts at each end, then when you go into a roundabout and you're circling, then you're indifferent which exit you take. And so then it makes the choices even. So instead of being biased to go through, it makes this choice more available to folks. So we think if we did that, more folks who don't have any business in the city can go that direction. Furthermore, it creates a gateway feature. So when you're on the highway, when you cross those 2 points, now you're in a city, and there's kids, there's schools, there's pedestrians, there's cyclists, there's a university, there's all sorts of things, past this, and so it changes from a highway vocabulary in terms of design to more city-friendly design on the other side. So the roundabout's a really good threshold for say, now you're in the city. Secondly, there's some people who come in and they're not going through the square, but they're going somewhere else. And so, for example, if you're coming in, maybe you go down to the school instead of coming up this way to the school, or those sorts of things. Again, helping take the pressure off the square. That's the whole idea. And then getting a little closer to the square, this is the bones. If you did an x-ray of the city, this is what it would look like. But Maple Street, for example, funnels a lot of folks right into here. And there's really not very many effective ways of getting around except to go through the square. These are the only two streets that don't have T intersections, which aren't conducive to sharing traffic loads. So we came up with two ideas of changing the network. We're thinking if these are like really loose ideas right now, but there's a whole series of parking lots through here. We're thinking, well, maybe we could put a street there, a little street, and now instead of having everybody shut up right at the square, wherever they're going, they have like 1, 2, 3, 4 ways of getting around instead of funneling everybody to this one spot. So we thought that would help spread the loads a little bit. It also helps, you look at the size of this block. We call it a super block. And whenever we have super blocks, there's always traffic issues on the corners. And there's a classic example of a super block problem right on that corner. And so by providing a little bit of network, we can get the block about in scale with the other blocks, and actually create some really nice addresses to give some animation to this park back here, this green space back here. So that was one idea, and then up here, there's an opportunity to provide a more legible connection to the north of the square. And that allows, when you're having events, the people can still get around. When during busy times, particularly for the local traffic, when you're just going home or going to school or what have you, you have other routing options. So we think that all of our ideas for the square would work today, but your city is growing. You're just getting a new hotel. You're continuing to get stuff built here, and if we don't start thinking about these network connections, you're gonna have problems again like 15 years from now or 20 years from now. And it's never ever going to get easier than today to add network, because every time you build something, you get another constraint. So think about it through the long-term health of your city. Network is a really good idea. So I'm going to turn this part over to Ken, and he's going to talk to you about getting more detail now. So we started regionally, and we're focusing on more and more detail, and Ken's going to talk to you about the streets themselves and their designs.
So first, and of course, Ian's shown you a lot of photos, so this is going to be using a lot of that, the tools that were in that toolbox of ideas that Ian was showing earlier. We'll look at some of the traffic calming things. And first, we want to show this slide. We showed some folks earlier in the week. There's an app called Strava that people use when cycling and running. And just to show the power of biking in your community already and the effectiveness that the Greenbelt's already having, the red lines are where there's heavy use of bikes. And it's folks that are recreationally cycling typically, and they have the app on their phone or on their GPS. And you can just see how just the Greenbelt itself has really grown cycling in the area. And you can see the common routes that folks are using. This is the square. So people are already riding north and south. They're already coming in. And so we're hoping some of these street ideas will also help bring people up from the campus and give them some additional routes, so that it's not just the cars that are using other network, but cyclists and pedestrians and folks running can also have more routes. And so kind of stepping back and thinking about, looking at that bone network that Ian just showed, looking at some of the streets that we have to play with, some of these, like the orange routes, were kind of those little network ideas that connect things like Cedar. Looking at the intersection on Bankhead and Noonan, thinking about, all right, we talked about the roundabouts at the edges and how those kind of work as gateway features coming in on the extra peripheral. But as people are coming in, especially on streets like Bankhead, that's one that, it's already, it's 5 lanes. The things that we can do to narrow that up, the traffic volumes really aren't warranting that many lanes. If we start slowing things down and provide routing on the bypass, maybe that's an opportunity where we could narrow it, go to that 3-lane kind of section, and kind of the yellow line up there and out Maple. The extra space, maybe we could allocate that space for a shared use path or some of those kind of things like Ian was showing down in West Palm, where you could have a linear path there adjacent to the street so people could bike, walk, and use that space that's currently now pretty car dominant. And then as you're coming into town, create some gateway pieces that again slow people down, give them options of taking streets like Cedar. You know, if they don't need to get through the square, if that's not their current destination, give them that northern route to get through the downtown. And then some of these other yellow lines are potential north-south, you know, thinking of that Strava map of where people are already wanting to bike. You know, how can we get them to the green belt effectively, and using some of these streets to do that. So then in diving down closer to the square, you know, if we start looking at some of these network areas and thinking about, okay, as people are approaching the square itself, let's say that's where they really want to end up, is in the square. How can we really start to give that sense of place and create some you know, clues as they're driving, whether it be through horizontal treatments like Ian was showing with bricks, or raising the intersections, raising the crosswalks, just so, you know, they're not speed humps, they're not things like that to slow the cars down. There's just that vocabulary that the streets don't feel like you're supposed to be going 40 miles an hour, that, you know, I'm getting ready to enter a sense of place in this square, you know, down to 20 miles an hour, down to 10 miles an hour, down to a pace that you can see pedestrians, you can see cyclists. So the ideas are, you know, that you have this kind of shared use path coming along Maple, entering the square, and then potentially going on out Noonan and to Bankhead, and giving some opportunities for things like raised crosswalks, maybe actually raising the intersections there at Dixie and to the north, just again to give that sense of, I'm entering someplace new, I need to change my behavior. And then like Ian was showing the amphitheater, you know, maybe this, you know, the square and whatever happens there can kind of bleed down, and then when you're having large events at the amp, you know, people can kind of bleed out, go up to the shops, go up to the restaurants, and really experience the square holistically through the streets themselves. And so then when we start to look at the square and what could happen there, and looking at the adjacent streets and the spaces left over, you know, you could start seeing where if we don't need things like the turn lanes, some of the other extra dimension in the street, what can we start to use it for? So things like the shared use path along the south side, using things like on-street parking to add more parking for the businesses. You know, and again, having some of these features that help slow people down as they're coming in, you know, in a couple of spots. And so it becomes, you know, it's one of those kind of things like when you're entering, you know, a big plaza or a mall or things, you know, there's different pieces that, you know, are thresholds that bring you in, that let you know that you're entering someplace special. Because the whole idea is kind of think, you know, the square needs to be the square, not so much, you know, Noonan Street or Alabama Street, you're entering Adamson Square. And so what are some things that we can do? So here's kind of an idea of your 4-lane section. Ian showed the road diet earlier. You've got typical 10-foot travel lanes, you know, things like the 3-lane road diet. You know, Ian showed how, you know, that's pretty common, but reallocating that space to things like a shared use path, you know, really makes a lot of sense. And then as you're coming into downtown, you know, you've got some places just a block off from the square that have the extra turn lane. You already have some on-street parking. You know, here's a good example right there at the intersection, right before you get into the square. And so there's things like just shifting the parking over. So if you're looking at this photo, shifting that parking over, taking away the turn lane, just in, you know, if it's not needed in the square, and reallocating that space to the shared use path along the south side. So then the streets then feed into the square. So
Okay,
Ian's
let's
going
talk
to
about the
run
square.
through some ideas about the square itself.
So we started at the regional scale, and then we're starting to define the town around those gateway features, so people know they're in the downtown. Then when you get to the square, what happens there? So this is, a lot of people suggested a roundabout, and this is a roundabout drawn to scale in the square. And so your square is about 240 feet across, and the roundabout, the inscribed diameter from here to here is about 110 feet or so. So folks, like Ken was saying, you don't need the turn lanes with roundabouts. You come in, every turn's a right turn, you turn right in, you turn right out. So this would slow cars down. You get rid of all the cues and the confusion with all the signals. They're very easy to cross. Normally, we don't go to the extent we are here, but here we're suggesting those raised crosswalks at the crossings to make drivers go even slower. It'd be very easy to cross the street on foot. And as Ken was saying, these are repeated up the street. We heard a lot of complaints about people speeding, you know, by the courthouse and other places. So this keeps the speeds down a lot. Also, in the roundabout, what we call the deflection helps keeps the speeds down. So this would be a pretty pedestrian-friendly space. Right now, the kind of the outdoor expression of the buildings happens along the edge, and then this area is for primarily for parking and the driveways. The roundabout doesn't lend itself to driveways, so this space can be recycled into any number of functions, like Greta discussed. Okay. We heard about this square as a bit of a precedent in Franklin, Tennessee. This square is about 30% bigger than your square, and they have a kind of a modified roundabout in the middle, and this looks like kind of wasted space behind the cars, and there's the parking. But this is actually important for the cars because they need to be able to back up and then get into the roundabout. Interestingly, the traffic volumes here are about the same as in your square, so it's fairly comparable. And so we designed one similar, so you've got the parking area and then the maneuvering area and a circulating area. So it has some advantages over what you have because you don't have those 8 driveways, but you still have this, and you still have a lot of maneuvering. So there's probably some safety issues associated with this. It'd be better than what you have, but not exactly ideal from a safety perspective. And both the options I've showed so far have a pretty large open area, and you have a hot climate, and so this outdoor room could be far more comfortable than is shown here. So this is the outdoor room idea. This is one of the squares in Savannah. Again, it's hard to see the square from top view because of the roof. So when we're talking about this option, if we were to just show you the plan with everything, all you'd see was trees. It would be like buying a house and only seeing the roof. You know, you actually want to take the roof off and look in the rooms and see how it's laid out and everything. So let's, oh, there's under the canopy. So wonderful place for people underneath this cooling canopy. So we stripped away everything for a moment just for illustration purposes of this outdoor room content. These are more or less the trees that exist, and the idea here is somewhat similar to the Tennessee example where drivers come in and have this sort of informal circulation pattern. And then handicapped access was a big concern of the community, so we've put in some handicapped parking in each quadrant, and also loading and unloading. The furniture store, for example, has to load to and from the square. I imagine there's other businesses that have to do similar things. So we have a loading zone on all the quadrants as well. And then we added these sort of spaces for emergency vehicle access. So there's emergency vehicle access all throughout the square. And so a fire truck can get the longest distance between an emergency access and a storefront is 40 feet. So the average distance is 20 feet. So the fire trucks can get very close to any building with this concept. I know that came up because there was a fire and everyone was concerned about fire access. And then we added program. And these are just starter ideas, but in here we have a dance floor that can be used as a chess thing, and we've got a beer garden, which is a very popular idea. Then we have a splash fountain, and all kinds of things, a reading room, benches, all sorts of tables and chairs. And we spoke to we've been eating in your square every day, by the way, and we've spoken to a lot of the folks at the restaurants, and they would love to be able to double the size of their restaurants out in the square during the nice weather. We were listening to a band last night, was it 10:30 or so when we had supper? And they usually play out in the square, but they're very limited on the space they have because they're confined to the edge. But this kind of thing would allow much more kind of entrepreneurship in the square. And it dawned on us then, maybe another starter idea. Maybe this could be the American beer place, and then we can have like British beers over here, and maybe European, mainland Europe, and then maybe Mexico and Canada beer. I don't know, but you can imagine having a place that's known for exchange. People come from all over to to participate in this, because you have something for everybody here. And the idea would be, wherever you are in the region, you would say, hey, you wanna do something on the weekend or tonight? And you just come to the square and you would find it here. And this space, and especially with your